Welcome back to Shift Happens. I'm Blair Hicken, and this is the show where leaders share their real stories about modernizing how they run businesses across systems, process, and how they go to market. Today, I'm joined by Dee Bowers. Dee works with professional service organizations to improve how they approach marketing, sales, and pipeline management, helping firms move from relationship-driven growth into a more structured and scalable go-to-market models. Dee, it's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. I'm glad to join.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up focusing on professional services firms?
Yeah, well, I was a young marketer, and a lot of my clients happened to be professional services. Was not the exciting industry that I thought I was going to see myself in, like packaging and design. But, I got into professional services and I thought, wow, that is quite the nut to crack. And I find that it's more complex and exciting than anybody in my friends or family group will ever understand. And I spent a lot of time starting off in marketing and then sales enablement and client experience, and then finally kind of overseeing the whole revenue function from marketing to sales to CS and then revenue operations within professional service firms. And when we think about that, think about very trust-based, very compliance-driven firms.
Yeah. So what drew you to the sales and marketing side? Is that what you originally started when you jumped out into the business world?
No, not at all. I started in graphic design and web development, but it was a natural extension. You're updating people's website, you're giving them advice, and all of a sudden they're asking about other things, and it just seemed, to me, it seemed very natural, a natural expansion. And then, you can't get into marketing, at least from my perspective, without starting to think about sales because they go hand in hand. And everything in the revenue cycle is so interconnected. I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into any one area because it is so heavily reliant on performance upmarket or messaging upmarket. So I think they just go hand in hand.
Great. And so is there a specific PS firm type or, vertical that you have been more successful in or that you're focused on?
Yeah, so when I think of B2B professional services, a lot of times it's tech services. So for a long time, I was with value-added resellers and system integrators of software solutions, and then also accounting in general, so tax, audit, and then typically they have a consulting arm where they do outsourced accounting, tech implementation, etc. So those are the areas that I've been pretty invested in, along with GRC is a really popular one too.
Okay. And is there a size that you have really been able to impact better at, the size of organization?
Yeah, I would say between 10 million and 100 million. I know that's pretty variable, but what I find is that, you can go into a really large diversified firm and help not only the service lines or the departments, but also the firm in general and how it thinks about revenue.
And do you find that these organizations already have a sales arm or a team that's already focused on that sales and marketing that you're jumping in there, or are you dealing with founders and leaders, in general?
Oh, all kinds. So I find myself in firms that already have really great teams and being able to support those teams to get where they need to go. But then also a lot of times I get called in when, founders are like, I am done. I am selling, I am marketing, and it is not scaling. So I'm ready to go ahead and build something that's more repeatable. Now, it doesn't happen overnight because usually by the time they reach out, they are at their wits' end, but it does happen.
Right.
And so I think that can be really rewarding as well.
That's great. So what do you think the biggest challenges are on how a professional service firm grows or sees the market today?
Yeah, really good question is for a long time, I feel like there were a number of professional service firms, not necessarily tech service firms. I feel like they're a little bit more on the cutting edge, but professional service firms in general, especially where it's really relationship-based, trust-based, that felt like sales and marketing were not something they wanted to be associated with. It was dirty, right? And then that they were the product, so they had to do everything.
Right.
And I think really getting into that mindset and shifting that mindset has been an important part of the work, is that in relationship-based businesses, trust-based businesses, there is a place for sales and marketing. There is a place for non-founder-led business development and sales, and even delivery and CS, right, as we think about it. And the days where one person has to do all of those things should be over. There are folks out there who specialize in it, and it doesn't mean that, that you have to change your model to not deliver client value. If anything, I think that it delivers more client value because you have a crisper, value proposition. You have a very professional sales cycle, and then you have a really tightened up delivery model in which, you're also connecting back with the client in a more structured and intentional cadence.
And so, these firms, where's the big struggle when you're first meeting with them? What's the big struggle? Is it marketing, sales, or it's an alignment, sort of getting the balance between those?
Yeah, what I find is that the biggest struggle that I get called for is we need more leads.
Yeah.
And so always with more leads. And so really it's about creating a two-pronged approach, and that is getting demand going now and helping them see traction, but then also what is that kind of longer term engine that we're building on the back end. And a lot of time it's really helping them define their ICP again. In professional services especially, what I find is that firms can do everything. They can serve a lot of folks. And so what happens is they go into the market thinking, my target is really XYZ, or it's really broad. And then because they have the expertise in-house or they land a client in a different industry, then that becomes their industry too. And so really helping them take a step back and go, you can have a very different client base, but your ICP is really focused. So if a client comes to you and they want help and you can serve them well, you can still do that. But really who you should go after, who your efforts should be directed to, and who you should be speaking to should still be that ICP. So moving back, helping them define that, and then helping them define what those clients actually find valuable, not what we want to serve them with that is the most valuable, which can be a little bit of a struggle with alignment. But I find once those two things are really established, you can help firms create really tight messaging to their ICP that resonates, and that comes through in the sales and marketing and lead generation.
Yeah. And so how do you, and this might be my question specifically, it's how do you help firms move away from being so reliant on historical referrals or, the legacy of referrals into that marketing and reaching out and having a voice, and, sort of bringing that interest in?
Yeah. So I don't think that we have to move away from referrals, but I think the way that we can do that is a little bit more intentional. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach. First, we have to understand how our customers find us, and where we want to engage with them. So do they like to do their research and find us online? Most times, yes, right? There is some element of making sure that you show up well to them. And so you have to have a really good, strong brand that's speaking their language and really articulates the value of services you provide. But then separately also building those referral channels intentionally. Partnerships are still important. But what does that look like? What do you have as far as a partner play? Do you go to market with them, right? Who's managing those relationships? So I really like to just make sure that when I'm working with firms that historically get referrals, that we're supporting that business development aspect or partner development with dedicated roles oftentimes.
Great. And do you find when you're, new into the relationship and just sort of understanding how they've been doing it in the past, have you found, that there's a common mistake that people have made or an assumption they've made as they try to formalize this sales and marketing voice and, direction?
Yeah, I think a few issues that come up pretty regularly is trying to do everything for everyone.
Yeah.
So getting that really broad ICP, but not just that, but then they're going after every industry with a different message. They're trying to do everything digital, partnerships, events, creating their own IP, all of these things. And those just build more and more go-to-markets. So by the end of it, you're running, 24 go-to-markets. Your team is exhausted and you're not going to do any of them well. So what I like to do is help firms also pick the plays that are going to bring them to revenue the fastest. And that means making intentional decisions about what you're not going to do as well, which I think is critical. So that is one huge area that I think firms struggle with. And I've struggled with it in the past as a go-to-market leader. You want to do all these things. Your competitors are doing all those things, so you feel like you have to do them too. And I just don't think that's true. And then the other thing is treating sales and marketing and incentivizing them in a way that creates competition. And so not holding them accountable as a team as well. When sales is starting to stray from messaging, it really needs to be an aligned back and forth between sales and marketing. So, hey, why is it not resonating? Bring that feedback back to marketing so it creates a feedback loop. and you're building on each other's messaging. So I think that is another thing, is just how we incentivize those groups to work together and making sure that their leadership teams are working together, not throwing each other under the bus too.
That's great. Yeah, I have seen that happen. I can, hear the voice in the back of my head. So that's great feedback. Thanks. So, and, how have you seen the buyer or the buyer persona, or what buyers are looking for change over the last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, well, I think that buyers are just inundated. And so it is really important that, companies show value. I also think that there's a lot of buyers, and I speak from experience too, that just have been burnt out there on the market, right? The value in the client service is no longer there. And for a number of reasons. And so you engage with providers and there's a distrust rather than an excitement. And so I think some of, buyers out there are just skeptical, and they're getting inundated with messaging too that is from AI. I mean, everybody's seen their competitors just put out a ton of content. And so they're shifting and trying to get through to who's going to be able to serve them the best. And a lot of times they're going on to like community sites like Reddit. They're looking for other users' reviews, right? They're trying to get to what's really true rather than what AI is pushing out to them. And they're also looking on AI too, right?
Right. Yeah. So certainly, buyers seem to be more informed, but they have more sources these days,
So many sources,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. So how should firms, adapt to that, knowing that, clients have so many different places they can get background information or information on solutions long before they, reach out. How do you prepare for that and build, you know, a plan around that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand your buyer. Now, you're not going to understand every nuance of every buyer, but generally speaking, where do your buyers hang out, right? What are they looking at for reference? So, if I'm a business, I want to know where do they spend their time, typically recreationally, what age group they're in, and then how do I get in front of them in those places or through the channels that they trust. So if my buyer is Gen Z, I might be a little bit more excited about advertising on Reddit. And not just advertising, but engaging in Reddit, right? And that means authentic content, being very open with who you are, but then providing value add in discussions as well. If my buyer is a little more experienced and they're out there, they're, either Gen X or Boomer or whatever the case is there, I'm going to go where they typically find referrals, whether that's an event, an association, and maybe I'm going to pick a number of those. I typically know that our buyers like to be educated about things. So, using things like webinars, etc. But then also, as the buyer journey has changed over these last few years and is going to continue to change, I do think that firms need to invest in, AI search results and how they show up there, whether that's, geo. I think that those are important investments that firms can be making today. But I think also, as I'm thinking about this as well, is creating still thought leadership is still relevant to the market as well, and how they prepare their businesses for this next evolution in the market.
So does this put more pressure on having the right systems and data and being able to identify those trends?
I think so. Personally, I am a little bit of a data nerd, but I do think that I think data and systems are critical to make informed decisions as an owner, right? I want to know who I'm serving. I want to know about my client base. I want to know about my prospects. I want to know how I'm performing and how my business health is. For that, I need to have some data. Now, I'm not going to, use data for everything. There are some decisions that we have to make as business owners, as business leaders, where we're not going to have the data to make it. But wherever we can, having that data is critical. And it also helps you, I think, get a leg up in the market. So for example, if I have systems that tell me what my greatest lead sources are, right? I want that data because I want to keep investing in those things, and I don't want to invest in the things that aren't driving impact in my business. Similarly, I've invested all this money to get these clients. I want to know what my client cohorts are. What do segments of my client base look like so I can upsell them, so I can predictively sell them. So absolutely, I think technology is super critical and having data is super critical in this day and age.
So are you finding that the clients that you're working with have already invested in this type of technology where they're, that they have marketing leads and opportunity management into the sales process, like a CRM type solution? Or is this something new and you're trying to bring a measure of, tracking that metrics and doing that?
I find that it is completely varied. What I typically see is tech services usually drinks their own Kool-Aid, which I love, right? And they have systems in place. And so they're typically a little bit ahead there. But sometimes they're not tracking really relevant metrics as well. So it's kind of like the cobbler shoes at the same time. So they're using technology, sometimes not using it to the best of its ability because they're so busy serving clients. But when I work with accounting firms, it can be hit or miss whether they're even using a CRM. So helping them get in there and get their data into the systems that we need in order to see that outside of just practice management and run the business has been a pretty important element of that as well.
Yeah, we see very much the same thing. The technology-based customers often have the technology there, but we find that it was potentially initially implemented with a thought and practice in place, potentially by their internal team or an external firm, and then it's never moved forward, even though the software might have advanced and the capabilities may have advanced, but the processes remain the same. And so, coming in and offering a new frame of reference on how to utilize that, the data and what the systems can do is key.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure you see with clients too, a lot of times the initial idea of how it was implemented has changed so much, and the business needs have changed so much. Also, when you have experts in-house, sometimes things can grow and get wild, and all of a sudden the CRM or the ERP implemented is now doing, at least it was implemented to do way too much.
Right.
And we needed like a tenth of that, so let's take a step back and simplify just so that we can get what we need.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, taking that step back and, is it, are we tracking the right things? Are we, populating fields that we'll never use again? Streamlining that whole onboarding and pipeline process is key.
Oh, yes. And I find that, we can get really excited about all the data we want to get out of the sales process. And when you're boots on the ground and you're a salesperson, that is the last thing you want to do because you want to be trying to make those client connections. And so it's a real balance saying, does a business really need this? What decisions is it going to drive or change? We can always add it in the future, but what do we need for them to enter? And then what can we actually enrich within the system that they don't have to enter that actually probably is going to be more up to date and we can accept maybe it's not perfect in exchange for that.
Yeah, trying to identify whether it's the system or the process is one of the, initial steps when you have the ability to step in as an external consultant into the organization, just have a fresh look at what they're doing. Yeah, it's often they are complaining about the system, and it's really reviewing their process and questioning why are you tracking it.
Yep. We have an old saying, at least in go-to-market, is you can't software yourself out of a bad process because at the end of the day, you're going to implement the same nightmare if you don't get your processes in order.
That's right. So where do you see AI and automation that, is a big discussion point these days? Where do you see that making a difference in today's sales and marketing areas?
Yeah, I mean, in the whole kind of GTM verse, I think it makes a huge difference. So a few things. When I think about AI in sales and marketing, and actually just in GTM in general, taking a step back, being able to be found, kind of first place, right? Making sure that we're found in those results. But then separately, I do think that marketing and sales professionals are going to be orchestrators in the future. All of these solutions, people love to say that they're going to save time and effort. They're going to automate so many processes. But I don't know about you, but what I've found and what some of the teams have found that I work with is that it just means that there's more things that you have to orchestrate for a campaign.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is making sure we're not just adopting technology with no strategy. What do we need? And so making sure that our teams don't become oversaturated with all the new tools and things. But then separately, using AI, I think, and even LLMs can be so powerful to a firm I've helped firms in the past implement that predictive modeling system, which is so helpful because so many times we all chase net new logos and we
Right.
love net new logos,
Yeah.
right? And I'm a fan of net new too.
Right.
However, some of the best growth that you will ever see is going to be out of your current client base. It is going to be cheaper and they're already fans. So why not? Why don't you want to grow those accounts? And I find that that's usually an afterthought rather than an intentional motion. So using AI and language learning models to actually help with that predictive modeling can be so powerful for firms and teams today.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to understand, what needs to be in place before you start to go down the path of, fully committing into an AI model to drive business and marketing. And so I think having that messaging and understanding, who your, profile opportunity is, understanding what your messaging is so that you can everyone be clear, including your AI model that you've selected.
Yeah, well, and I think also to this idea, at least in the marketing space, I've heard a few people say, oh, well, I only need one marketer and then all AI. For some firms that are smaller, maybe that's true. But, large organizations, that is not true. And, they still can't do everything. And
Right.
so you're never going to get a really novel idea out of a AI for marketing. And I'm going to tell you what, every time I get a SDR calling me that's an AI SDR, the first thing I do is hang up. So, there is still this human element that I think is critical and is going to be a differentiator for so many firms.
Yeah. So on that, what do you think is, currently overhyped versus genuinely useful in this sort of model driven new world?
Overhyped. That's a great question. I think it's because I'm older and maybe more cynical. I think most things are overhyped. I hear them.
Exactly.
I do think a lot of the I think a lot of the design tools are a little bit overhyped. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I see the graphics and I'm like, oh man, like yeah, it's good. You're getting the core out, but it looks like AI. I don't know. Maybe it's because I come from that design background. There's a feeling that I get from it when I see it, and I think, no, we need real designers, right? But I'm sure it will come to fruition. I also think a lot of um, the AI SDRs completely overhyped. Don't love
Yeah.
them. But I do think that there's things that are really underhyped. Um, I think that some of these tools are so useful in disseminating information, large quantities of information. Now, you still have to check it. And
Right.
you still have to verify the sources because, sometimes you click through and you're like, oh, okay, that source doesn't really exist. But in the models where there are really great research tools, I think that, that is just leaps and bounds and can be so helpful for teams and also leadership just to understand like, hey, how can I see this differently? What trends am I not seeing?
Yeah. So is there a collection of tools or things that you use that, for you just seem to work?
Yes, but I'm also using them, I think, in a way that it feels like an assistant. So I love note taker tools. I
Yeah.
hate note taker tools that join the call though. So some of my favorite tools, and I don't know if that's what you're asking or not, but I'm happy to go over those.
Yeah. So what's one of the tools that comes to the top of your mind there that you
I love
really appreciate?
Granola.
Yeah.
So it's a note taker. It sits in the background, and it summarizes notes from each call, and it can sync to your CRM. So that is something that I think is super useful.
Great.
Yeah, and it can even help do follow-up emails. But again, one of those things that I think is overhyped. I feel like a follow-up email, it can help, but
Right.
definitely don't let these things go wild. There's a tool called Condo that helps you manage LinkedIn a lot better.
Okay.
I think that is super useful. I love Notebook LM.
Yeah, it's great.
Sounds
Uh,
like you use that as well.
yeah. Yeah. The amount of information you can feed into it and then, the things both that you can ask and you can produce from it is great.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I the graphics too. Even though sometimes I'm not a fan and I just bash them, other times I'm like, oh, it gave me some pretty cool concepts to work
Right.
with.
The starting point. But, for someone like yourself with a design background, you can take it to the next step. Someone in my role, my experience in design, it's good enough. It's a starting point. I need to hand it off to someone else.
Yeah, well, sometimes, it can be so helpful too in just helping. I feel like also really complex imagery that I'm like, oh man, how do I even start with this? Like you said,
Yeah.
you go to that starting point and goes,
Right.
okay, so that is a really good, option for us. Transcription, all of those things can be super helpful. I mean, I think that there's some predictive tools that my clients are using out there, which I love as well. It's probably a little niche, so I'm not going to go into those, but there's just a lot of great tools out there and some that just aren't so great. I also like Manos a lot too for that research piece.
Okay. What's one thing you wish professional service leaders would understand about growing their business?
It takes intention. And that doesn't mean just hiring a salesperson or hiring a marketing person and expecting it all to change. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the CEO has to own go-to-market. And what that means is they have to be really clear. They have to believe in the path that they're going down, and then they have to give those leaders support. And what that means is making intentional investments in what you are and what you're not going to pursue. And then, I think the other thing too is that in firms where there's a lot of partners, a lot of times it's just a lot of vying for priority. At some point, everybody needs to succeed, yes, and everybody needs to be able to understand their clear value proposition and help with that. But then too, in these larger diversified firms, how are we serving clients the best and making sure that we're not driving ourselves crazy with all the activity we can do that doesn't really drive impact. And so, I think when professional services think of growth, they can do anything. They can. They have so much talent in house. They have so much opportunity out there. But getting focused is really what they need to do in order to be intentional. And then also, I would say in the world of PE consolidation, which has really dipped its toes quite heavily in professional services, is making sure that they're optimized to do business well. And that means not maximizing, not burning people out, but just being really intentional about growth and making sure that they're not overspending and not underspending as well.
Right. So what 3 things do you think firms should focus on in 2026, early 2027, just to help them move forward and make a significant change in their business and movement that you've seen?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to the basics, is really being focused on who they're going to serve and understanding the value that they bring to the table. We just mentioned AI, PE. There's just a lot of noise out there. And the services industry can get pretty commoditized from time to time. I mean, we saw that in GRC, right? And so just being able to take a step back and saying, okay, what do clients from their perspective want from us?
Right.
And what is going to bring them value? And then how do I make sure that I can articulate that? So when the person down the street calls with a similar service, I can set myself apart. I can be that premium decision, right, that they go with. So I think that is critical. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is is the most boring thing too, is create SOPs. Like, get your process down. There are so many tools out there. I hate it too, okay?
Yeah.
But it is going to be so important if you want to take advantage of all the automation. If you want to invest in technology, just do it. Like, again, so many tools. Get your SOPs underway, but then you can also take a step back and go, oh my God, we are doing it that way? Why are we doing it that way? Let's simplify it and automate it if we can. And then, lastly, 3 things. I think that they have to be ready to pivot. This is a very dynamic environment, and I think we're all feeling it. There's a lot that's going on.
There is.
And so as part of being lifelong learners and advising so many of our clients, we also need to, continue to learn and take our own medicine, pivot as the market pivots, and, just do our best to weather these AI storms, these consolidation storms that are thrown at us.
Well, it's been great talking to you today. And I think you've shared, a great amount of information from your background and your client experience. So it's been very helpful. It was great talking with you today, Dee.
Oh, thank you so much, Blair. It's great talking to you.